I'm J Street's Chief of Staff, and I'm going to be moderating the call today. I'd like to thank Dr. Yossi Beilin and Advocate Talia Sasson for joining us from Israel. We're really looking forward to a fascinating call. Many of you have been submitting questions, which I've used to compile an outline for facilitating today's conversation between Dr. Beilin and Ms. Sasson, but I also would like to invite you to submit questions throughout the call by sending an email to info@jstreet.org. Today's call is the first call in a series we'll be hosting as part of J Street's 2 campaign. The 2 campaigns are our effort to grow and demonstrate what Secretary of Kerry has called the Great Constituency for Peace. As he said, we must tell our leaders that we support the 2-state solution, and J Street believes that doing so will be absolutely crucial to helping the current round of negotiations lead to an agreement. But saying you support a 2-state solution is not enough. The second goal of the 2 campaign is amplifying the notion that supporting the 2-state solution requires supporting the hard choices that must be made by both sides of each of what is called in the negotiating room the core issues of the conflict: borders and settlements, security, Jerusalem, and refugees. Today's call is on borders and settlements, and we'll be covering the other issues, 1 per month over the next 3 months. Before we get started with the call, I'd like to take a couple of moments to just share briefly with you ways that you and other activists can get involved in the 2 campaign. First, get to know the 2 campaign website, www.2campaign.org. It has great material on it, including short videos on each of the core issues that can really help people become stronger advocates for a 2-state solution. Second, make sure you've signed the 2 campaign petition and ask your friends and family to do the same. The easiest way is by sharing the 2 campaign website at 2campaign.org. The petition is a powerful tool to help educate friends and at the same time demonstrate that broad support that exists for the hard choices necessary in reaching a 2-state solution. The petition is addressed to Secretary of State John Kerry. Third, check out our resource and events page at 2campaign.org. Attend an event near you or plan an event using one of our resource guides. We'll be adding additional resources to this page during the month of December. There's an online pledge card. You can print it out and have your friends and family sign at holiday gatherings. And there are programs you can bring to your synagogue. When we send out an action alert, please forward it to your social networks. It's one of the best ways for us to exponentially increase the impact of the campaign and J Street's work more generally. In February, we'll be having town halls in several cities and towns. Keep an eye out for information on these gatherings. Also, please like the 2 campaign and J Street on Facebook and frequently share our posts and follow J Street on Twitter. Lastly, J Street's 40-plus chapters are making plans to get the word out about the 2 campaign. This will include meetings with members of Congress and district offices. We hope you consider getting engaged with your local chapter if there is one in your area, and if you're not sure, please email Josh Freed, who's our new National Director for Regional Strategy, at josh@jstreet.org. We're very excited to have him on board. Okay, I'm going to turn the line over now to J Street U's Campaign Co-Chair for Education, Adina Brin from Bates College, to introduce our speakers.
Hi, everyone. As Steve mentioned, I'm Adina. I'm the Campaign Co-Chair for Education with J Street U. So on our call today, we have 2 really exciting experts. We are so honored to hear from Talia Sasson, who is one of Israel's leading experts on settlements. In 2004, she was asked by Prime Minister Ariel Sharon to investigate illegal outposts in the West Bank and to give a recommendation for a course of action. To that end, she published the Sasson Report, which documents Israeli government support for settlement growth against its own established policies. We are also so excited to hear from Dr. Yossi Beilin, who is a longtime public servant who has served as Israel's Minister of Economics and Planning, the Minister in the Prime Minister's Office, Minister of Justice, and Minister of Religious Affairs. He has represented the Labour Party in the Knesset for many years, and he later served as the head of the Meretz Yachad Party. Dr. Beilin was one of the architects of the 1993 Oslo Accords, which was the first joint commitment by Israelis and Palestinians to establish a 2-state solution, and he later spearheaded the Geneva Initiative, a joint model agreement for what a final status agreement might look like.
All right, thanks so much, Adina, and welcome to our speakers. Talia, I just want to make sure, can you just say hello, just to make sure that you're unmuted? Talia, are
Do
you
you hear
on?
me?
Can you hear me? Yes, I hear you. Do you hear me?
Yes, I do.
Okay, terrific. And Dr. Beilin, can you hear me? Okay, I'm going to ask my assistant here to just get Dr. Beilin on the call. And while we're waiting, Talia, let's get started. The core issues we'll be looking at today are borders and settlements. But before we jump into this, I know that everyone is anxious to hear your comment on the historic opportunity that yesterday's deal in Geneva brings. So I'd love to hear your comments on yesterday's deal and what you think it means for Israel.
Well, I believe that the Iranian problem with the nuclear weapon should be solved and will be solved by a diplomatic solution. I don't believe that by a military action, the goal of stopping Iran to produce this nuclear weapon can succeed anyhow. So I believe that the only solution that could be is a diplomatic one. I believe in the sanctions, and I believe that if this beginning of agreement that was achieved yesterday won't help, and I hope it will, and only in the few next months we will know if it's working or not. But if it won't, then the sanctions should be renewed. I don't think, as much as you're asking me, well, this is an assumption, of course, I know nothing about it, but I don't believe that Israel by itself can solve this problem, especially can't solve it by a military action, to my opinion. I hope I'm not going to be wrong. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Talia. Now moving on to the core issue of settlements. Given that you're a leader of the Council for Peace and Security, do you believe that the 1967 lines with swaps are defensible borders? And how do the settlements factor into that?
Well, first of all, I believe it is a defensible borders. It were defensible borders for 19 years when Israel was less powerful than today. And I believe that today we have to consider, first of all, to give an answer for this question, is to consider what are the risks that Israel has to face with. So, in my opinion, there are two main risks, security risks for Israel. One is a rocket risk, danger. The rockets, they could come whatever from Iran or from Syria or from whatever, Egypt or I don't know. So the West Bank won't help it at all. And the other risk is a terror attack on Israel, and this is too can come from the West Bank. Anyhow, the continuance of the settlement enterprise in the West Bank may consider as a trigger for terrorist activity, but anyhow not for something that could help us to prevent those terrorist activity against Israel. On the contrary, Israel will have to face terror attacks on Israel, and on the same time, or rockets, and on the same time, Israel will have to defend the settlements in the West Bank, where there are 340,000 Israelis that are living there in many places, in 126 settlements, between them 3 towns, and above that more than 100 outposts all over the West Bank, between 2.6 million Palestinians. So this is a very heavy burden on the soldiers of the IDF and not an asset at all. So I believe that 67 borders are defendable. And now we're talking about swap land that I have to explain why the swap land are so important. They're in the lines, behind the lines of the green lines, as we call them, the lines of 67. There are approximately more than 500,000 Israelis that are living. For the government of Israel, any government, it's too difficult to remove all those settlers back to the State of Israel. So the only solution that could work, I believe, is to the majority of settlements to leave them as they are and to remove the border. And therefore, President Obama said that he believes in a solution based on 67 borders by land swap. It means that approximately 400,000 Israelis will remain in their places where they are, and only 150,000 will have to move back to Israel. And this is the land swap could enable us. But of course, the land swap, we have to understand that there's a limit to the land swap, and the reserve of land are ended. And as long as Bibi Netanyahu's government bringing more and more settlers to the West Bank, then we could say that the window of opportunity is going to be shut down. Because if there will be too many settlers, we don't have any reserve of swap land, then we won't be able to remove all the settlers that is needed back to the Green Line. And therefore, the peace agreement is extremely, extremely urgent. And therefore, I support any peace negotiations and efforts to bring the two sides to an agreement between them, because it is an initial Israeli interest to achieve peace agreement and to establish the Palestinian state. It is an Israeli interest.
Thanks, Talia. I was living in Israel during the Gaza disengagement, and I remember it was almost like a color war between those that were against the disengagement with orange shirts and orange ribbons, and those who were in favor of the disengagement with blue ribbons and blue shirts. And I remember every night I would go to sleep, and I'd wake up and the blue ribbon on my car had been cut off and someone tied an orange ribbon onto it. I'm wondering today what you think the political will would be in the context of a comprehensive deal. So not like Gaza, which was a unilateral withdrawal, but in the context of a comprehensive deal, what do you think the political will would be in Israel amongst the public for withdrawing 100 or more thousand settlers from the West Bank?
This is extremely difficult for any government. Look at the government since the Sharon terms from 2005. No government removed any outpost, even an outpost, from its place except one outpost, which was Migron by the instructions, the orders of the High Court of Justice. And when the government had no choice anymore and had to do that. And for doing that, the government of Bibi Netanyahu, the former government of Bibi Netanyahu, decided this is the first time since 1990 that the government decided formally of establishing a new settlement in the West Bank and for the new Migron. And it was done for the purpose to remove those illegal outpost Migron from its place. So removing settlers from their place by government of Israel is something extremely difficult. On the other hand, I want to remind all of the listeners that through the disengagement, many people said, what will happen? Does the IDF capable to do that? Maybe it will break the IDF's back by the refusal of soldiers to fulfill orders. But in 1 week only, 8,000 people came back from the Gaza Strip back to the State of Israel with no one casualty. And everything was settled. And this is only because I believe the Prime Minister at that time, Ariel Sharon, he meant business. He decided to do that. And when a Prime Minister will be determined. To do that, I believe that it could be done. Of course, I don't want to delude any one of you. The disengagement from Gaza Strip and the removal of settlers of 150,000 to 140,000 people from the West Bank is not the same at all. And there's a lot of differences between the population and between the circumstances and a lot of things. But it could be done through some time, and I believe it could be done. If I would say it can't be, then I would accept something that I can't, that this is the end of the State of Israel according to its established principles as it was created. Because the State of Israel as the homeland of the Jewish people and a democratic state depend on the end of occupation in the West Bank.
Talia, it's Yossi Beilin. Just wanted to say that I'm online.
Good,
Thanks,
Yossi.
Dr. Beilin.
Nice hearing you.
And I apologize for the technical difficulties. I'm glad you're with us. Maybe I'll move over to you now and ask some questions regarding borders. Dr. Beilin, Secretary Kerry has a clear goal, 2 states for 2 people through negotiations. What are his options regarding the borders of a 2-state solution, and what compromises are possible from your experience? And are there major differences between the models and maps that have been floated in the past?
I think that the idea of the new border between the 2 states with land swaps, according to the 67 borders, is the same principle since 67. It's 46 years that we are more or less speaking about the same thing since the Rogers Plan of 69 and in many other plans. And those who want to get an agreement know that this is the one, and those who do not want to achieve an agreement know the same thing. So in the Geneva Initiative, now Geneva is an agreement, we have to differentiate. So that in the Geneva Initiative in 2003, we spoke about an annexation of 2.25% of the West Bank by Israel, where there were the settlement blocks adjacent to the Green Line, and a full compensation of the same area around the Gaza Strip. This was the idea then. So one can speak about a little bit more than that perhaps, but one should also know that there will be a price, and the price will be that if you are speaking about annexation of 3% or 3.5%, you will have to compensate the Palestinian state from the Israel sovereignty.
And do you believe that exchange will have to be an equivalent percentage, or what in the past has prevented us from getting past that obstacle?
Well, I think that in the past there were some ideas, mainly by Barak and Olmert in 2000 and in 2008. None of them refer to exact compensation, exact land from Israel. I mean, Olmert was much closer, but he spoke about annexation of 5.8% of the West Bank, which is, I believe, much too much, and a compensation of about 4.5%. So there was no equality. Barak spoke about an annexation of 9% and a compensation of about 3%, so it was far from being equal. There was never a proposal speaking about 100% compensation, a formal proposal. There were some informal proposals, actually 2. One was the Ayalon Nusseibeh principles, and the other was the Geneva Initiative, which spoke about 100%.
Thank you. One other question on borders. What about the Jordan Valley? What are the possible scenarios there, and what's the best option in your opinion?
I think that Israel needs the Jordan Valley badly in the 19th century.
And in the 21st century?
No need at all. I mean, the whole story of the Alon plan and the hills and the valleys, it is really a joke. I mean, people are speaking from another era in history when they are speaking about all these things. What are we going to defend ourselves against? Iraq, Jordan? Who are the enemies there that we have to defend ourselves from? We are putting the army in a very slim strip near the Jordan River, which might be a fatal trap to the soldiers. It is really an idiotic idea, which is coming from really fear and another era.
Sasson, you, as I mentioned, are one of the leaders of the Council for Peace and Security, which has over 1,000 retired generals and army experts. Do you share Dr. Beilin's assessment on the Jordan Valley?
Of course, because this is what I spoke before, because the dangers, the risks that Israel has to face with is rockets risks. What the IDF on the Jordan Valley will help, the rockets, the soldiers will be there and the rockets in Tel Aviv. So how it's going to help us? As Yossi said, this is a danger for another era that passed away. It's just an excuse, in my opinion, to say we need this land.
Talia, what was the biggest surprise you faced in putting together your landmark report, the Sasson report? And can you just give some background on what that report was?
Well, there were a few, but the most one of the biggest surprise I faced with was that I realized that the Prime Minister of the State of Israel wanted to stop the phenomena of outposts and couldn't. And I believe he was surprised too. And therefore he thought that if he can't stop it, and he couldn't, maybe by legal tools he could achieve this goal that he failed to achieve by other tools.
Thanks. Dr. Beilin, in your experience in negotiations, what are the key interests of both sides regarding borders? I mean, what are sort of the places where we'll get stuck in the negotiating room?
I think that when we are speaking about borders, we are speaking about myth more than anything else. The truth is that the 67 borders or the 49th borders were interim ones, and they were not sacred. And the fact that the Palestinians are sticking to the 67 borders is not because this is exactly their historical homeland and something else is very far from it. On the Israeli side, the 67 borders became kind of an impossible compromise, and the right is using something stupid that Abba Eban said many years ago, that the green line or the 67 border is the Auschwitz border. Now, in reality, there is no reason in the world why not to create a new border which might be shorter and more convenient for both sides. But this will not happen, apparently, because myth has a lot to do in our story on both sides. And for the Palestinians, the area of the 67 borders, namely 22% of the West Bank, namely about 6,300 square kilometers, is the golden number. And I think that we have to accept it. And on the Israeli side, I think that we lived in the 67 borders until 67, and we were quite secure there. And we can get back to the same area, especially when we are speaking about a non-militarized Palestinian state. The fear that rockets would be shot at the Ben Gurion airport are fears, and nobody can prove that it will never happen. But you cannot live on your fears all your life. And I think that if there is peace, the prospect for something like this is much lower than if there is no peace.
Thank you. I'm going to turn over to our participants and ask that if anyone wants to ask a question, you can press 1 to raise your hand. And in the meantime, I'm going to ask Dr. Beilin one more question, which is slightly off topic, but I know everyone's anxious to hear your opinion as well. We heard from Ms. Sasson about her reflections on yesterday's agreement in Geneva, and we'd just be interested in hearing yours as well before we go to question and answer.
Well, I didn't hear the answer, but I do not believe that the gaps are huge. I think that it is a big mitzvah to the world, what was done yesterday. And I really applaud the administration, the President and Secretary Kerry for what they did. It will be a much nicer world if these military threats will not be around, and we will not live in fear and in threatening each other. And I think that eventually, if you analyze what was published so far, it's really chapeau, because I think that on the Iranian side, it is a freeze for the next half a year, and on the world side, the sanctions are still on, and the compromise is a very minimal one. It means that the Palestinians were really, the Iranians were really under pressure when they agreed to it. And I think that what Netanyahu is doing now is inexplicable and shows how frightened the man is. I mean, it is him. He is not playing a game. The guy actually is a very frightened person who would not be happy with any agreement. Once the Iranians are signing an agreement, it will be wrong for him to accept. And so I think that objectively we are speaking about a very, very dramatic and positive development. And I hope that Israel will not find itself in the corner as the only factor in the world which is openly saying, unlike some Arab countries, which is openly saying that it is a bad agreement, because it is a good one.
Thank you. I'm going to unmute. I don't have names, I just have numbers, so I'm going to share the phone number that I'm going to unmute, and you can ask your question. The number is 646-402-3245. Go ahead with your question.
Oh, thank you. This is a question for both of the panelists. The difference between the views from the right and left political spectrum on the risks of establishing a Palestinian state really seem to, in a large part, revolve around the perceived risk of the West Bank becoming another Gaza or southern Lebanon. Those on the right inflate that risk, and I guess those on the left feel the risk is small enough to accept in the context of a peace settlement. And my question is, what is the evidence base or the strategic analysis that allows people involved to make a realistic assessment of that risk? Is it a myth that this could happen? Is it a small risk, a large risk? How do we make that judgment?
Yossi will be the first.
Well, it is so unscientific. The whole issue of agreements is mainly a weighing up of the risk to make them on the one hand and not making them on the other hand. Now, those who are afraid may be right. I mean, it is not that we are always right and they are always wrong. There are many examples in the world in which agreements were conducive to violence, and there are many more agreements in the world which were conducive to peace and a quiet situation. Now, the question is, from your experience and from your knowledge and the learning history, you are weighing up the risk and saying, well, I believe that it might be risky perhaps, but it is much better than the current situation. This is, by the way, much truer when we are speaking about the Golan Heights or in the past about Sinai. With the West Bank, it is another situation because there is the demographic problem. Even if, God forbid, the right is right and the risks are becoming a reality and the West Bank becomes Gaza, even then, I would say, get rid of it. To hell, get rid of it. What do you want to do? To have in South Africa with a minority of Jews dominating a majority of Palestinians? This is something that we cannot not allow ourselves, even if there are security problems. And this is why I believe that eventually, even a righteous prime minister will do what Sharon did in Gaza. He will go to the fence or to the wall unilaterally if he doesn't want to have an agreement with the Palestinians. And this will be much worse than even a bad agreement. The idea of Netanyahu, which was followed by Kerry wrongly, that a bad agreement is worse than no agreement, in my view, is wrong, generally speaking, but for sure is wrong when we are speaking about the West Bank. I prefer an imperfect agreement on the West Bank rather than a perfect non-agreement with the Palestinians.
Thanks, Dr. Beilin. Talia, did you want to comment on that?
Yeah. I would like to relate to this, just to add something to what Yossi said, because of course I agree with him. In my opinion, we have to make difference between the conflict of Israeli with the Palestinian people and between something else which relates to Israel definition of and character of the State of Israel. The continuation of the occupation with the settlements enterprise in the West Bank, bringing Israel to a place where this state will turn to be, instead of the homeland of the Jewish people and a democratic state, a binational state that will be in the future an Arab state with the Arab majority and Jewish minority. We will lose our character as the homeland of the Jewish people, and we will lose, I believe, democracy too. So it's our initial interest to make the separation between the Palestinians and the Israelis. We need it. With peace agreement, I prefer. We can't achieve peace agreement without it. We have to separate between the two people. This is our Israeli Jewish interest.
Thank you. Let's take another question. I'm going to unmute 415-435-7051. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Going back to the Iranian quote-unquote settlement, you said that Netanyahu is running scared. Please comment on the fact that, for what we understand, the unwritten part of it is already interpreted completely differently in Iran, as they maintain their right to do X, Y, Z, and the West saying, well, it's all going to be controlled. And also, please comment on the relative level of skill of negotiation. After all, Iranians have been superb negotiations for centuries, and they take a kind of a chess attitude, long-term moves, whereas our people were so anxious to come out with something signed that please comment on the half-full, half-empty interpretations of the centrifuges and the enrichment and so forth. Thank you.
Well,
Who'd like to take that one?
I believe that the part of what you said, the unwritten part, which might be interpreted as the right to enrich and might be interpreted as if there was no reference to it, is really not the major part of the agreement, because here we are speaking about something which is close to poetry, to honor, to respect, but it is not the real thing on the ground. On the ground, what will happen is a freeze. Now, the part of the agreement is that they might enrich the 3.5%, and they are saying, okay, if this is the case, then it means that we have the right to enrich. So what? They might interpret this part of the agreement rightly, by the way. But I think that this is the main price that the 5+1 are paying for having something which will really freeze the enrichment and prevent any serious developments towards nuclear weapons. About the negotiations, I must say that I'm not so much impressed by the Iranian experience in negotiations. They put their country in one of the worst situations in history. And the fact that they have a bazaar and they know how to negotiate in the market doesn't mean that they are better diplomats or that their achievement is better than the achievement of the 5+1. I must admit that this morning when I got up and saw the details of the agreement, I was quite surprised by the achievement of the 5+1. And I think that it shows how eager they were, the Iranians, to have an agreement because the sanctions work. And I think that the fact that the sanctions were there, and mainly part of it because of Netanyahu, is something that Netanyahu should be proud of. And rather than saying it is a bad agreement and I will not respect it and whatever, he could say, it is a good agreement because of the sanctions. And I believe that I had a part in convincing the world to put these sanctions. What he's doing in that case is very stupid.
Thank you, Dr.
I wanted to add to this something, that I believe that every side wants to promote its own interest. The Iranians want to persuade their people that they had a big success, and they present their achievement as if they were like this in their country. In Israel, the Prime Minister of Israel, I don't know why, he thinks, I believe, that this way of presenting the agreement with the Iranians as a bad agreement and so on, he could push the American to be in a more pushing place by Israel to achieve something more than they could achieve without it in the future. I don't agree with this policy. I don't think it's worthwhile, and I think it might be counterproductive.
Thanks, Talia. Let's take another question. I'm going to unmute 718-858-3171, and please introduce yourself.
Frank Bamberger from Brooklyn, New York. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
On settlements, I would like the two of you to respond to something that I heard from Ari Shavik this week. He said that by trying to find a final status solution via the negotiations at this time can't possibly work. He is looking for an interim solution coming out of the negotiations in which, first of all, the settlements are frozen, and then time by time, settlements are withdrawn one by one to give the Palestinians more assurance that there is a future for them. Is this a view of Shavit's that can hold water?
If you're asking me, I don't believe that because I don't believe the Palestinians will accept that. You have always, look, when you're making a negotiation and when you want to achieve something with agreement with the other side, you have to take under consideration their demands. You are not on your own and say, well, I want it to be like this and this is what it's going to be. So I don't believe that the Palestinians will accept that. And I don't believe that Bibi Netanyahu will freeze the settlements. I am, as a matter of fact, I'm not sure he can. I think that what could be done is an agreement about the whole thing, and then the implementation could be by steps.
Thanks, Talia. Let's take another question. I'm going to unmute 608-833-3007. Please introduce yourself and go ahead.
Thank you. I'm Alan Weisbart in Madison, Wisconsin. I'd like to ask a question about something that is fairly rarely discussed, but seems to me interesting in the context of land swaps and Jewish population centers in what might become the state of Palestine. And that's the question of that part of the Palestinian people who are Arab citizens of the state of Israel now. Why is there so little discussion of whether they might desire a status as citizens of the state of Palestine, and so little discussion of whether there are any Arab villages or communities in the existing state of Israel that might prefer to be part of a state of Palestine in the context of a larger settlement? I mean to be talking only about voluntary decisions and not forced expulsions. But I'm curious why this receives so little discussion.
I'll tell you
Thanks
exactly.
so much, Dr. Beilin. Do you want to take this one?
Yeah, it is not an issue because according to the Israeli law, there are 4 reasons for taking the citizenship of citizens of Israel, and the peace agreement is not one of them. So if you talk about it and you speak about voluntary decisions, nobody can prevent anybody from doing what they want. But if you are speaking about the idea of Lieberman to transfer actually Palestinians on their land to the Palestinian state in exchange for land in the West Bank, this is actually taking your citizens and telling them from one day to another that they are not going to remain your citizens, and this is something that will never happen. And this is why it is not an issue. Once you raise this issue, you are perceived as somebody who is imposing it on them, and this is impossible. But there is no question at all that if there are Palestinians, and there might be those Palestinians who would like to live elsewhere, or even if there is an Arab village which decides together to be part of the Palestinian state, I don't think that the Israelis will tell them, the state of Israel will tell them, no way.
All right.
I think, may I add something to this?
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think when Lieberman is talking about such thing, what he means is to transfer the people, the Palestinian citizens of Israel, to Palestine, and their land will remain in Israel. Well, this can't happen by international conventions that Israel signed on. So this is illegal, in my opinion. Every citizen of Israel, Palestinian or whatever, is authorized to live wherever he wants. He could move tomorrow morning to Tel Aviv. So if you want to take his land and annex it to Palestine, you'll have to give him compensation exactly as you're going to give to the settlers. So I think that the whole idea is a mistake, misunderstanding, and I believe that nobody could relate to this seriously in Israel.
Thanks so much. I'm going to open up line 805-858-9217. Please introduce yourself. Go ahead. All right, let's try a different line. Let's go for 718-858-3171.
This is Frank Bamberger. I've already asked my question. Thank you very much.
All right, if anyone has a last question, please press 1. I'm going to unmute. I'm going to unmute 717-380-7023. Go ahead.
And swaps that would. I was under the impression.
Can you start your question from the beginning? We couldn't hear you. Go ahead.
Hang on. Okay. I may have misunderstood. You might have answered my question. But I was under the impression that the land swaps that are discussed would involve land that is occupied by Arab Israeli citizens and putting those Israeli citizens in a dilemma about whether they want to be part of Palestine or want to be Israeli citizens where their land would become part of Palestine. Is that not correct?
No, it is not correct. The land swap that we are speaking about is between the land which Israel might annex, and this will be mainly settlement blocks with an area in Israel which is unsettled by anybody and which will be transferred to the Palestinians as a compensation for our annexation.
That's right.
Okay, I'm going to take one more question, and then I'll ask one final question of the speakers. So I'm going to open up the line 301-980-9802. Please introduce yourself. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Asher. I'm on the National Board of District E. I go to Dartmouth College. My question concerns Dr. Beilin's op-ed in the New York Times 2 weeks ago about a possible plan where in 5 years the number of Israeli settlers living in the future state of Palestine, that's the quota for the number of Palestinians with the right of return. So my question is twofold. One, do you think it's acceptable to Palestinians to have their right of return, which they view as an inherent right, contingent on the number of settlers who are living in the future state of Palestine who are there illegally? That's part one. Part two is, do you realistically think that many settlers will move back given this incentive because of their religious attachment to places like Shiloh, Hebron, and other places? Do you think that it's actually feasible that a good number of settlers would move back?
Well, I believe that it is very, very difficult to convince a government in Israel, especially a rightist government, to do something serious if you don't deal with the issue of the settlements. Because for the government to confront more than 100,000 settlers, it will not be simple. I agree with Talia that at the end of the day, we are a state of law and we will have to implement it. But the question is whether the Prime Minister will be ready to sign an agreement which will confront him with so many settlers. And this is why what I suggested is to do something which will prevent any kind of such confrontation. To have a land swap so that most of the settlers in Jerusalem and the West Bank will be under the future Israeli sovereignty. And then in the areas of the Palestinian state, there will remain settlers for 5 years. After these 5 years, one should count them. And the number should be the minimal quota for Palestinians. I did not write refugees. For Palestinian citizens who would like to live in Israel as permanent inhabitants. Now, this idea might solve two problems: to prevent the confrontation, and to give the Palestinians the knowledge that we are not saying to them, no one refugee will come to Israel. Although it might be a small number, I do not think that the number will be big, because the Israelis who will remain in the West Bank, in the Palestinian state, will know that by remaining there, they are increasing the number of the Palestinians who will move to Israel. And that will be an incentive for any government in Israel to do whatever it can in order to convince these people to move to Israel.
Ms. Sasson, did you want to comment on that as well?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I don't.
So
This is.
Go. Sorry?
No.
Okay. I'm going to ask one final question and then make some closing remarks. This question is for both of you. J Street answers Secretary of State John Kerry's call to create a great constituency of peace through our 2 campaign. And as we say that we support the hard choices that reaching a 2-state agreement will require, what advice do you have for J Street?
My advice is to support Kerry's plan.
Nice, short and sweet. Dr. Beilin?
Well, I have no doubt. I think that you are having an administration which is saying the right things about the peace process. Committed some mistakes, tactical mistakes, in the last 5 years, but the heart is in the right place, and the initiative of Kerry in the last months is a huge surprise, and a good surprise to those of us who believe in peace and who were afraid that the Americans actually gave up on us. And that is why the American initiative should be supported. Of course, it is never blindly. If something seems to us unfair or stupid, we should say it. But generally speaking, I think that Kerry is speaking about the solution that all of us are thinking about, and if this is the case, it will be obvious to support him.
This is our
Thank
interest.
Thank you. I'd like to thank both Dr. Yossi Beilin and Advocate Talia Sasson once again for joining us. I apologize for the technical issues that we were having at the beginning of the call. Like I said, we will be running one of these calls each month on one of the core issues. And please do visit the 2campaign website, www.2campaign.org. That's the number 2campaign.org to get involved in the campaign. Thanks again to our speakers. Thanks to all of you for participating, and have a good rest of the day.
Thank you very much.